Hold on a second.
Okay, just a second.
The syllabus says it's 3 short papers.
Next week, we're going to begin with the analyze. And no assignment, of course. But you should think about the first paper now. And for the analyze, maybe Paul, you can say one thing about the first paper.
Okay, just read the syllabus. It's already on the syllabus. So.
I don't think it says what the question is.
No, we haven't. I think next week, maybe older though, just a few minutes.
Okay.
Next week we're going to like Monday. I'm sorry, Tuesday. We give you some ideas about the. I think the first paper I would like to have more personal reactions. The second paper will be more text-based, and the third paper will be a combination of the two. But in class, I would like to ask the question for you to identify two statements in the analyze. One is something you consider inspiring or important. The other one is something that's puzzling, or even you strongly object to it. And so that could serve as the basis for our general discussion. Any questions about the method involved? You may have just a taste of what Confucian humanism is all about. There's a number of questions. For example, is that a religion? Is that philosophy? Or is that ethics? And I don't want to answer those questions, but I'm going to touch those questions in today's presentation. And I want you to interrupt me when you feel that something needs to be clarified. Or if you have some urgent questions, don't worry about it. You just raise them in the class. I try to characterize Confucianism as a humanism, and I think most of us accept the view that humanism is necessarily secular. If you're a humanist, you're not particularly concerned about the spiritual world. You're not particularly concerned about nature. Your primary concern is about the human world. Actually, I was given what they call a lifelong achievement by American humanists. And it's a very large organization with 800 people or so from all over the world. And I felt honored. And then I decided to give a lecture. And fortunately, nobody walked out. But the lecture was very much, very different from the normal conception of humanism. And I began to say, my sense of humanism is not against spiritualism on one hand or naturalism on the other. I would like to see the humanistic project greatly broadened. So you don't consider your humanistic vision as something you reject religion on the one hand, you're not too much concerned about nature on the other. And this is basically my argument. An Indian professor by the name of Balasubramanian, when you take notes, many of the words you're not familiar with, then don't worry, because these words are just for reference. Eventually, I may give you a list of the words I use or the names. Balasubramanian, in a meeting I organized entitled Indian and Chinese Philosophical Perspectives of Knowledge, Wisdom, and Spirituality. And he presented a paper, a major scholar in Indian thought, and characterized Confucianism as spiritual humanism. I like that. And try to think about it as a spiritual humanism. Of course, each one of us has a view about spiritual. And there's a general survey. For example, to say, are you a member of a religion? In the Boston area, many people say, no, I'm not a member of a religion. I'm a free thinker. Are you religious? And many people say, yes, I am religious, even though I don't belong to a particular religion. And the overwhelming majority of the people say, I'm spiritual. I even believe in ghosts and spirits, even though I'm a rationalist in the 21st century. You know, I don't have to pose the question here now. No, that you can think about. Now, the spiritual humanism, as I understand it, involves 4 dimensions. I already alluded to, but I haven't really focused my attention on. These 4 dimensions are distinguishable but integrated. If you want to think about Confucianism, if Confucianism is considered as spiritual humanism, it involves all these 4 dimensions. If you focus one at the expense of the others, you only see partial view of this particular value orientation. One is the question of the self. We'll understand it. Learning is for the sake of the self, character building, almost like the idea of the liberal arts education. The difference between the liberal arts education and professional training is that you study, and the purpose for your study is not clearly defined in terms of your career. You can become a doctor, become a lawyer, become a computer scientist, but you're learning, you know, like the core, even though the core is now replaced by the general education, you really have to be exposed to at least 5 or 6 areas of human knowledge. You need to know something about historical analysis. You don't have to major in history, but you should have this historical memory. You should be exposed to art and literature. You should develop a sense of how you reason. You don't have to be committed to be a Christian, to be a Buddhist, or to be a Confucian, but you want to be familiar, you want to familiarize yourself with the different modes of moral reasoning. This is part of it. Also, you need to develop some sense about natural sciences. And right now, we also believe you should develop some idea about quantitative method. You have to be able to use computer and so forth. And I noted that in terms of the Confucian project, I use the word project, it is not a reductionist model. I sometimes use big words, but try to think reductionist, meaning to reduce a complex phenomena to one particular definition, so you get it. And of course, the reductionist model has been used by the Greeks, by modern philosophers. So we want to find out what a human being is. You know, this will repeat myself. Human being is a rational animal. Immediately, we should ask the question, what do you mean? A rational animal is certainly a defining characteristic of being human, but can you think in pure thought without involving your emotion? Can you be rational at the expense of being emotional? Most people say no. Some Buddhists are trained to think in terms of pure consciousness, but overwhelming majority of us cannot do it. When you think, your emotion is involved. So we have to say human being is emotion. Can you say human beings are so isolated in terms of the contemplative? You know, we call contemplative mode of life. In the Greek philosophy, there are 2 very different modes of thinking. One is contemplative, the other one is practical. And the contemplative is always considered higher level. The best example is, of course, Plato's notion about the cave. You're all familiar with that. Most of us in the cave, chained, facing one direction. And the philosophers are out of the cave, so they see this beautiful scenery, sunshine and so forth. The philosopher has no way of helping us to get out of this chain and to move on. The only way is to help us, to lead us to get out, because we are blind, we're one dimension. So the rationality is a light, and that light source will help us to liberate ourselves. So this idea of being rational, being human, is very powerful. Since we're not isolated individuals, we are social. Inevitably social.